I started to say, I see like. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I admire it. I was gonna tell you.
Yeah, they're all.
I just feel like the light is.
Awesome, let's get started, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for coming. We have Marc Castellnou here today. He is from the Catalan Fire Service and has worked in fire for a long time, a long time now. Started off as a firefighter and then kind of moved to more of a fire ecology, prescribed fire role within his position. And then all the way up to being an incident commander and a fire manager currently. He has fought fire on almost every continent, if not all, except for Antarctica, probably. And is one of the founders of Costa, which is a wonderful organization. If you are not familiar with it. He is also in the process almost to completion of getting his PhD in more atmospheric physics and kind of merging that atmospheric science with fire in his current role. And as he told me, he was working on a PhD just to have access to better computing power. So that's out there as well. But he is going to talk today about lots of amazing extreme fire events. And with that, I'll let him take it away.
Okay, thanks. I know you hear me from the last row. Yeah, okay. I will talk a lot about physics on fire, but mainly I will try to build a bridge between the fire ecology and the way we manage the landscape to fight against extreme wildfires. So in the middle of the presentation, physics can be a little bit overwhelming, so I'm sorry for that. I have to show you evidence of what I'm going to talk about. So our motivation to get into this research as an incident commander, because we are not academic, we are firefighters, but we need answers to phenomena like the one you're going to see. That's Pedro Grande fire in Portugal, 2017, was one of the deadliest fires in Europe at that time. After that, Greece and California and Australia has created those events again. But just to come back, just look at this. Let's give it up. So look at the fire. The fire is going to town. We are protecting the town and fighting the fire there. We expect the fire to turn to the left with the arrival of the cold front. You can see all the clouds of the dry system coming. But that's late in the day, and we expect the fire going down the slope with the shift. Right now, it's the shift. We expect the fire here because the night is coming and it's going down. Yeah, it's the fire is opening the whole flank and it's going crazy, but it should calm down if we follow the models, the way they explain fire behavior. But fire didn't calm down and it get a complex behavior. At that moment, we didn't have the tools. After that moment, we've seen that again and again and again. So 2017 is seen in the extreme fire world as the year that things change. Look at the base of the cloud there, how it's getting lower, 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 and now touches the ground and lights everything. So that movement, it's 11,000 hectares. That's 18 minutes, and that's 64 people gone. So what we see there, it's called to be the downdraft of a pyrocumulonimbus. But the problem is that we've seen those firestorms happening without the pyrocumulonimbus, without condensation. Not detected by satellites, not detected visually, not detected there. So at the end of 2017, there was a clear answer in the wildfire world, and especially in the F-band as well. It meant the physics we have about fire is not right. There is part of that is missing. And we cannot protect our civilians, we cannot protect our firefighters if we don't get it right. And the hypothesis of the pyro cities developed didn't match that event. So in reality, made the hypothesis wrong. So we've been using that hypothesis since that moment on, but we are trying to prove. And my talk is how improving that, we find out that the forest management we're applying, and I've been devoting my life to, which is prescribed burning and thinning and fuel treatments, might not be that right. So might be, it doesn't want to say it's wrong. It is not wrong, it's working. But it has some exceptions, and we need to know that. So that's what I'm going to talk about. So in our world, we are confronting a crisis of sustainability in our forest due to climate change, and a more stressed forest means a more fuel available and means a lot more intensity on wildfire. That's the theory. The pyroconvection creates those firestorms at an unprecedented scale. At least we didn't know such recurrence of firestorms events before. So anything that goes above 10,000 kilowatts per meter, it's overwhelming firefighting, and we've seen fires that are 120, 150,000 kilowatts per meter. So as a firefighters, we are really overwhelmed. And between 2017 and 2021, we've seen a lot of those events. So we need a better understanding, and that's what everybody is struggling to get. So there are global problems that we see, which is fires. In the example, that's one in Catalonia, those extreme wildfires without capacity of control, and a lot of dead forests because drought, because heat wave, and because climate change. So everything is coming together to create those events. And the approaches are more or less the same. That's mechanical treatments, thinnings, prescribed burning. That's what we are trying to do, and trying to realize if that works or not, and if we can cope with the need for that and to protect our forests. But the question when we ask if that is working, it is that we see firefighters find hours all around the world. That's our moment, the firefighters. We're failing globally, but money is being pumped into firefighting, and bigger planes and bigger helicopters and bigger efforts in that way. And we keep saying that approach is wrong. As an incident commander, I've been in front of the parliament and the Senate in Brussels and telling them that we don't need more money for fighting fires. What we need is more money to manage landscape, because only with landscape management, we will have enough opportunities to fight fires, not the other way around. But that sometimes doesn't have data to support it. And that's what I want to do today, is challenge that idea. I am an advocate of forest management. I've been devoting my life to that, expanding prescribed burning in Europe all the way back to when it was used everywhere in the 18th century. But we still see things not happening. We still see extreme fires happening in managed areas, and we still see extreme fires happening in areas where you have underburned a lot. So why that is happening, why that is failing, that's a problem. So that's one example of two cases. In the left, you see Pedra Grande burn scar. In the right, you see Dixie burn scar. In the Pedra Grande burn scar, as you can see, it's a populated area. It's a mosaic of forest and farmland, perhaps in towns. It was not one of those areas where you should expect that dramatic fire behavior. And in the Dixie fire, there is a kind of problem, which is that run that might run into managed forest area. And happening at the same time, and that run over here, and managed forest. And the one in the not managed did less damage than the one in the managed. So what happened there? So if we want to make sure we manage the future of our landscapes properly, we need to answer those questions, because if not, we might be doing something it's not having any effect, or it's having the wrong effect. That's my point here. So I believe that less fuel means less fire, because that's basic. But I do believe that we need to learn that better. So there are two hypotheses here. One hypothesis is the fuel hypothesis, that tells that fuel load is the important thing behind all those processes. And climate change is creating stress in the forest, and a stressed forest, it's a lot more fuel dead in there, and that means more intensity. That's a graph we did with Albiva and I flew from Canada in Australia back in 2009. That's like Saturday event, 173 people killed there. And that's the Anun event. And that's a plot showing the fire line intensity in kilowatts per meter that they were possible depending on the full load you had in the landscape. And you have the red line, dashed line, which is a 10,000 kilowatts per meter, which is the limit of survival for a firefighter. More than that intensity means second degree burn scar in your skin under your coat. So you cannot fight that fire unless you are a droid. And for the moment, we don't have droids still in our forest services. And a droid, I don't know if the connections and everything will be good for that. But anyway, as you can see, at noon, we get the peak. And we went almost to 90,000 kilowatts per meter if we were in areas with 30 tons per hectare. But areas with 10 tons per hectare were below the 10,000 kilowatts per meter. So that graphic was used to say it is a full problem. If we manage our landscape, no matter how intense the weather event will be, if there is not enough energy stored in our landscape, there is not energy to be released, so our fires can get that wild. That was the approach, and that's what we published. And it is quite logic, and it is what is guiding the full management all around. But 2019, we saw those things down in Bolivia. On the left side, you have a fire that burned 1 million hectares through a lot of days. It has one of the longest single runs in a day, around 100 miles in one afternoon. And it was pretty intense fire. But 2 years later, 2021, we get same fire, the same place, longer runs. And of course, with only 2 years, there is not enough full load to be there. So that tells it's not fuel driven, it's weather driven, extreme weather driven. So those are the two hypotheses in our world. I think that both are true, but that we cannot dismiss this one, because a lot of the extreme events that we see happen in areas when there are not that much fuel. Just look at the Texas fire 1 month ago. Look at the Paradise fire in California. Between the starting point and the Paradise UA interface area, that area was burned 8 and 12 years before the fire. So it's not a 80 years, 90 years full load area. And a lot of places are like this. And we see that again and again around the world. So it is something we don't get. And that's more or less what we're trying to do. So we did some research questions about moist by convection and full load, about thermodynamics in the atmosphere, and about how the thermodynamics of the dry pyroclouds, not the moist pyroclouds, can also play a role. We think that the dry pyroclouds are the kind of the hidden element nobody has been looking at, that are playing a deep role in enhancing fire behavior and creating conditions for extreme fire behavior, especially under wind conditions or especially under low fuel loads. And that's our hypothesis and how we will go through. So, and the first question about moist fire convection and the classical difference between wind-driven events and plume-driven events has been there since almost 40 years, especially Rothermel put that in a paper in 91 about convective wildfire, the wind-driven and the plume-driven. Byram talked about it back in the 50s. But this is the event in Portugal. As you can see there, we got in the same day, just in the span of 24 hours, wind-driven plus plume-driven and wind-driven under the same condition. So we went to one type to another type, and then again to the initial type under the same atmosphere. Either the atmosphere is a windy atmosphere or it's a convective atmosphere, but normally both are not the same. And the most important thing is that the convective thing, the plume-driven, happened at midnight. not during the day. And convection needs convective atmosphere, that's noon or afternoon, it's not midnight. So again, you say, okay, our wildfires can concatenate wind-driven and plume-driven types, and they don't depend on the lower atmosphere conditions, the way we understand. That's something we've been observing a lot of times right now, a lot of places around the world. The big pyrocity events in Australia, 2020, the first day of January, were happening at midnight as well. So that's one question. Another question is that, yes, we can classify our type of atmosphere according to that observation in the rates of speed inside the plume. So the thing that joins together the wind-driven fires and the plume-driven fires is how fast the air is rising through the plume. So lower plumes and lower velocities has a less fire behavior than higher plumes and higher velocities. And doesn't matter if it's moist or if it's dry. So the only important thing is it's that tall plumes can really move air quickly. It's a taller chimney, and that is what counts. Of course, if you get a moist paraconvection there, the moist paraconvection releases latent heat and creates a boost of elevation, and that increases the speed. So normally moist paraconvection are really tall plumes or tall chimneys that move air fast, but dry paracumulus or dry plumes also move air fast. So in the graph you have on the left, at the upper part you have the rise of speed of the plume, of two plumes shown there, and in the graph below you have the humidity. So the left graphic is a dry plume that has no humidity on it, and the right one is a pyrocity plume that has humidity, that has been measured through a radiosonde inside the plume, and it allows us to measure the speed. And the right-hand graph is showing the correlation between the vertical speed and the number of time the observed rate of spread of fire. It's higher than the rate of spread of fire if you use simulation. So based on the surface conditions, you run a simulation to get a rate of spread. And then you compare that with the real rate of spread, and you get that difference. Normally, you get between 1 to 2 times the difference, and that's because you don't get the right fuel or the right weather on the surface. But when you get more than 3 times, that's identified to be extreme fire. And as you can see, there is a good correlation between the rise of speed in the plume and the number of time it is changing. So we can say, okay, convective fires, doesn't matter if they are dry or moist, they change fire according to the change they create in the indraft of the plume. So if they create an indraft in the plume, it's really strong, the fire is following that wind. In Pedro Grande, we measure 170 kilometers per hour indraft weather on the surface, when the normal weather around us was between 5 and 10 kilometers an hour. So the indraft is changing fire behavior because the plume is injecting an elevation that creates a depression, and that is changing a lot in fire. And the physics of that plume and the buoyancy and all the mass flux that is going there, it is what is really important. And we discover that process is important because the higher the plume, the more volume of air you can move, so the fire can breathe faster. I mean, the combustion reaction is based on oxygen, and the fire needs to replace the burned oxygen really fast. The faster he can do it, the faster the fire can spread. So we found that was the common ground for what we initially thought were different types of fire, wind-driven or moist-driven fire. So based on that, and our observation, we create a hypothesis based on the dry period cloud. And basically, that's a complex graphic, but you understand that better in that video. Basically, what it says is that the initial boundary layer is changed to a new boundary layer by the turbulence the fire is creating, or the dry period cloud. So that dry period cloud is entraining air, and that air that is entraining, which is hotter, it's rising the AVL, and rising the AVL is creating a taller chimney. And creating a taller chimney is increasing the indraft, and increasing the indraft is increasing the rate of spread. So the process is not in our models. And we were looking only at the moist convection, but the dry convection is still a good process of enhancing fire spread. And you can see the sound inside that plume, how it's creating that loop over there, no matter the humidity. It's not moist plume, it's a pure dry plume, that's the humidity, and that's the rise of speed. And that's the process. That process can change a lot. And if this is in Lake Fire in California 2020, and from the distance, and you can see the initial fire, you can see initial fire there. That's a dry cloud there. That's the injection height. That injection height has the same level than the clouds over there. But the fire keeps going, it can push harder and now creates so much convection, but at the end, he's creating a second injection height. As you can see, the plume is a lot higher than it used to be. And now the fire is moving in and is trying and trying until he created a new injection height. So the fire gets faster. But take into account that initially, the fire was here. And the fire moved there inside the first injection height modified bundle layer. And when he gets into the first modified, he has a better condition to get another injection height. And once the fire gets into the second injection height modified bundle layer, he can finally get to the third injection height. So it's a feedback process of the fire interacting with the atmosphere. It is not based only on the fuel. I mean, it's not depending on the fuel intensity to create coupling with the atmosphere. It is based on the fuel intensity to create coupling with the atmosphere. But that coupling with the atmosphere can change atmospheric conditions. So the same energy can now create another injection height that will change the atmosphere. And when that change, he will be able to create another injection height once we get into the atmosphere. So that process, that feedback process of dry convection doesn't need a lot of fuel load. What it needs is time and stability to create the process. And that in hotter atmosphere, it's a lot easier to get. And that's what we think it is going on all around. So that's when we tested all the extreme fires around the world according to the stability in the atmosphere, is when we found the surprising things. So that's the upper atmosphere instability, and that's the lower atmosphere instability. So we expect to find all the extreme fires there, and exactly what we found them. But what we didn't expect is to find those here. So we can expect to find some there because they're the extreme wind-driven fire. So Texas fire, for example, Bolivia fire, they will find here. But some of them, like the Australian one, they will fall out there. In highly stable atmosphere, and especially late in the day and at night. But all of them are separated by the upper atmosphere. So if you look at the lower atmosphere, all of them are more or less in the same place. But if you want to separate the different types, the upper atmosphere can separate them better. So that means that what is governing the extreme fire types, it is not the lower atmosphere like we thought before. So lower atmosphere facilitates convection, that's true. But what facilitates an increase, an injection high, is the upper atmosphere instability. That what helps the fire get higher in a different levels or keeps the fire lower. If it allows the fire to go higher, that's a plume-driven fire. If compresses the fire to the ground, then it ventilates at the head fire, and that's a wind-driven fire. So it's one single physical process in the atmosphere that creates different types of fire. And that explains why fires can jump from one type to another with changes in the upper atmosphere. And that's what we saw last year in Canada when things started to blow up in April. So that's the blow up of Canada, and those are the wind-driven fire, and they get at night and they blow up as a pyrocivil. And the problem is that here, that's the stability, the high stability and the lower stability. they were in high stability, but at night they get into the blue, which is the lower stability in the upper atmosphere. So the change in the air mass in the upper troposphere, it was driving the change in fire behavior on the surface, because that was modulating how deep the injection height could get. And that was modulating how high the plume was and how strong the indraft was. So that changed a lot, but it created one unified theory on how those things work. And we say, well, if that's true, we got to see that around the world, because that's not a unique process related to one type of well. That's a process related to global circulation of instability. So that's when we went and looked around the world to elevate of extreme fires and classify the fires per size, and yellow if they spread during the day, red if they spread later in the day, beginning of the night, so day to night transition, or blue if their maximum spreads through the night. And the picture speaks clearly about the global pattern of extreme fires burning later in the day, beginning of the night, and they became extreme. So that means that at least the hypothesis that we are proposing it has a strong support from the trend worldwide on fires. Of course, we have a lot more fires in Europe, which is where we are working than we're in the world, but it's still strong. So we look at the process, and we model how the heat of the fire injected to the atmosphere can change the injection height. And then we tested if the original perceived by the fire services increase in firestorms can be explained by that. So in the first graph, you can see the LCL depth, which is the lifting condensation level. It means at which height the plume will create a pyrocumulus, means a white cloud. And this is the ABL height from the model. So you get a bunch of fires that are there on the line. So fires that if the plume can create a pyrocumulus, and then you get a lot of fires that are classified as dry. So fires that, if you look at the vertical profile in the models, you cannot say it will be a plume-dominated fire. So those are normal or wind-driven fires, and those are plume-dominated fires. So we classified every hour of every fire according to the time frame. Gray means it's wrong in there. It should be listed here, so that should be night, and that should be, sorry about that. I mean, the orange and the violet are the night ones, and the gray are the day ones. And then the size means the number of time the dot is and the number of time the rate of spread observed is higher than the expected one. So as you can see, those over there, which are the dry ones, when you modify the ABL by the injection height according to the energy, all of them move to that line. So that means that with hotter atmospheres, like the ones we are having now, a lot of the dry convection cases that used to stay down there, right now they are getting there, and they're predominantly night and day to night cases. That's what is creating that change, and that's what is creating or supporting our hypothesis. So what we can say is that actually we can see a lot more fires creating firestorms, because the level of energy they produce, doing that, they can change the atmosphere through the dry pyrocumulus process we've seen and rise until they get into condensation level. The tricky thing here is that when they get to the condensation level, if they don't have instability in the upper atmosphere, they create condensation, and then condensation cools down the atmosphere and stabilizes the process. And if there is enough instability, they blow up. But all of them create deep plumes, and that allows those atmospheres to go through the night. That's an example of Chile fire in 2022, where we saw a lot of the blow-ups happening. So in the upper fire field, that's the wind profile per hour, that's the humidity profile, and that's the temperature profile there. And this line, the violet line is the ABL, which is falling down through the night. But if you see here, which is the sun, there is a quite straight line that has the same elevation than the day violet line. That means that there is a kind of what we call a residual layer through the fires in hotter atmospheres, that once the fire created through the day, that in a stable layer, that stable layer stays there as a residual layer under the plume. So the fire under that plume can still use that layer through the end of the day and the beginning of the night, regardless the conditions on the environment. And that allows the fires to blow up under high stability conditions late in the night, like the picture you see there, which is the Chilean fire. We were just releasing the sun in, and that is what is creating a lot of those effects. And that's the same that we saw in Greece. That fire is Alexandroupolis. That's last summer. It was the biggest fire in Europe until the moment. And as you can see here, those big runs were at the night. And as you can see, the violet line drops to the night, but the blue line, which is the simulated injection high of the energy, stays up there the whole night long, and even goes on top of the green line, which is the condensation line, and creates the pyrocumulus. So if we account for the dry cloud effect on changing injection high and keeping that injection high, we can explain the blowing of fires through the night, and we can explain the increase of the number of moist convection events we can see globally. So that's a change on conditions, but that's a good tool to be used or to be incorporated into our analysis tools. We call that process decoupling. Why we call that decoupling? Because the fuel intensity allows the fire to modify the atmosphere. That's a coupling thing. But once it is created and can be sustained below the plume, then what it means is that the plume is sustaining that, decoupling that from the surface. So it stays there no matter the fuel conditions on the ground. And that allows for the fire to keep going. So once I explain that, I can come back to the initial theory I skipped because it was difficult to explain. So up there you can see the increasing, but here it is once you create it through the day, that line that stays through the night, regardless the decrease, you should see the model. So once the fire creates that umbrella, below the umbrella, there are entrainment processes that keep that unstable layer that high. So it means that the fire at night doesn't have to create that layer because it's there as a residual layer. And that is what can really promote that fire behavior. And that has deep consequences in our fire behavior. So over there in the Greek fire that we were looking at Alexandroupolis, that's over there you see the distribution of all our data set of fire, extreme fire hours, how deep the ABL by the model is. And it shows us a really central daytime high ABL means high chimneys for fire to evolve. That's a classical knowledge we have, and we expect extreme fire to happen at noon in the afternoon. But if we account for the injection high, what we see is a different frame. We see almost a 20 hours long frame on top of 2,000 meters. And that 20 hours long frame on top of 2,000 meters deep plumes correspond to the moment of high Ross bias, of rate of spread higher, observed higher than the expected, on top of 3 times that. So we can really somehow agree on that this process allows the original ABL conditions to create longer extreme weather conditions for fire to spread, and fire leaves or extreme fire start to depend less on fuel and depend more on the modified atmosphere by the initial fire condition. So what it poses, what it explains, it is that originally you need fuel to start the process. But when you created that process, it can keep going as long as the upper atmosphere allows it to go. It's like an engine car. All our cars has an electric engine to start the combustion engine. But once the electric car has started the combustion engine, that engine can go as long as it has fuel. And that's what we see in our extreme fire. Two processes. One is starting the coupling, but once the fire can decouple, it can go. And that's a game-changing thing. And so for us, that means that instead of the moist convection processes, which is the initial process we all expected the fire-ecology, now we have a lot of different processes, which is dry pyrocloud entrainment and dry pyrocloud evaporative cooling and dry pyrocloud radiative cooling and dry pyrocloud decoupling processes that increase the number of situations that work to create extreme fires. So we couldn't explain why we had that number of extreme fires with the original theory, but with that, the numbers are starting to fit into what we observe. So there's a long way to go in physics to understand all these, but if this explanation is more or less much reality. And so my question is why decoupling is important for fluid management and prescribed fire. That's all that explanation has been to arrive here. Now let's go deep into reality. This is a fire in northern part of Spain. This fire started here, burned over there one day, and then suddenly in the second day he blew up in that direction with a change in the wind. And we said, okay, it's because of the wind. But then at night, he just blew up in that direction without the wind. He ran out of fuel at the head of the fire, but then he used the flank, opened the flank and went from a wind-driven fire to a plume-driven fire. So that's a wind-driven fire from in the afternoon, and that's a plume-driven fire in the evening. And as you can see, the wind-driven fire didn't create that much black, but the plume-driven fire, it creates a lot of black, and it was a campfire. So the fire through the night was a lot more intense than the fire through the afternoon. That's totally shift around. And the most important thing, why this fire blew up in that direction? Because that fire started there, was shifting there in that direction. Everybody was leaving that flank more or less unprotected because it was a well-managed forest area. It was thin, it was mechanically treated, the brush, and we feel pretty safe. But then it really ran with the wind. Can we explain it? Wind and right fuel, yeah, it's there. But then at night, without wind, it doubled the size. And when he did almost 10,000 hectares during the whole day, and it was 22,000 hectares at 2 in the night. So it went a lot faster and doubled the size to the night. And that's the clear picture of the sky. You can see the runs in there, and you can see the difference with the runs in here. But overall, it's more or less an open landscape here. And we realized that in those type of fires that are burning under decoupled atmospheres, it means fire that during the day has created that high atmosphere and stable atmosphere and can keep that high atmosphere under that cloud, which is entraining and maintaining that instability. Those atmosphere maintain the fire burning through the night. Nice behavior in dense forest, which is still good behavior that you can, it's like a prescribed fire, you can use that to burn. But when they get into ventilated fuel types, they get into this type of behavior. So what we see here happening, it's a change on fire behavior because remember, it is not the fire pushing the plume through the atmosphere. It's not the intensity of the fire that's creating all that coupling. That happened before during the day. But now at night, is the dry cloud process maintaining that stability up there. And that instability, if you get a close canopy cover, can get into the ground. But as soon as you get a ventilated field type, open forest, it gets into the ground. And then the fire becomes wild. That's what we've been observing. And that's what we can show here. That's a structure of the atmosphere. On the left side, you have the rising speed of the plume, and that is plume that created a pyrocumulus, so that the rising speed 10 meters per second. And then in the pyrocloud, you create a boost in speed. And that's the instability process, the green line. That's the original structure of the atmosphere, and the green is kind of an instability process that it can rise into that elevation, which is the plume elevation. Well, I'm going to physics, but that's more like it. If, and that's the process, a simulated process for that fire. But if I close the canopy at the bottom of that simulation, if the first 20 meters of the vertical profile of temperature here, I reduce that 4 degrees. There. In theory, I should not see a big difference because the height of the atmosphere will be the same. But because the fire is rising the air, and in the canopy, you get an instability layer that is 4 degrees, that consumes a lot of the buoyancy of that plume. And that creates a totally different plume, which is this one. Don't account for this line, that's a problem of when translating the model into the spreadsheet to it. But as you can see, that the change 4 degrees in temperature, it still can rise to the same height like it's doing. But those initial 20-30 meters, 4 degrees cooler, change the rising speed from an average of 10 meters, 11 meters per second to an average of 5-6 meters per second. And if we come down to the initial slide, which is that one, when you go 10 meters per second, 11, it means that you have a fire that goes 10 to 12, 13 times faster than expected. And if you go down to the 5, it's a fire that is 3-4 times expected. And that's a game-changing thing. Only for the initial 30 meters of the vertical profile of the atmosphere. That means that less fuel is good because doesn't start coupling process. But once the process has started, what we need is an inversion layer close to the ground, and that's canopy. So fuel management, if we take into account that, seems to be, let's manage fuel to get less fuel in our landscape, but let's keep our canopies dense enough. And that's changing. So if we don't get that right, I don't know what that means exactly. It needs a lot more research, but that's a challenging question that comes out from observation on the fires, from the extreme fires around the world the last 5 years. And we need to take that into account, because if not, through the management, we can start to be creating conditions in our landscape for those decoupled fires to burn wild through the night everywhere. And we don't want to do that. That's the point. So that's where we are going. And that means that instead of low intensity fire, in a lot of places, what we need is kind of high intensity fires to create a mosaic of the underburned forest well managed, and then some stand replacement that will be filled up with dense stands of regeneration, and we'll keep the adaptation based on close canopy stand instead of opening small gaps to make a ventilated field type. So that's a challenge, and that's something we need to keep working on. And just to finish my presentation, that's the Greek fire spread and the island that was left, and the same map over there is severity. And there you can see where we had the tree cover up to 100% of the landscape. And that's exactly the line we were able to stop the fire. We were not able to do anything around the managed area, around all the UNFA settlements. It was deep into the unmanaged landscape that the runs didn't happen that night. So, food for thought for you. I expect you can help me solve this dilemma. That's because I travel the other side of the world. So, open to questions.
Do you think you're just not reducing the stand density enough? Like if you made it more of a savanna, would you see that?
The issue is that we've seen those wildfires running crazy in grassland, in savanna types, everything where it's ventilated full time. And we see that stopping again and again and again, everything where it's close canopy cover. So it means that, but the other point is that when we go and we look how after extreme fire the landscape look like, in those places where the fire has underburned, it has underburned to a dense canopy. What he leaves is a dense canopy. So the natural underburn are like this. So we tend to do underburning and create gaps because we want to favor regeneration. But it is not a quest about regeneration. It is a quest about survival. And some species like lodgepole, like Alepensis, they live in a stand replacement place and they create regeneration that is really thick. So somehow they are very well adapted to that process, which brings to me the possibility that what we see today through the climate change and the increase on number of firestorms is not a new process. Those species knew it. Those species had gone through that before and create an adaptation for that, which is a challenging question to be solved. But I mean, remind what I'm explaining it is not that this is the new process. It is that the normal coupling process is there and is the basic process. But with increased temperature in the atmosphere and higher boundary layers, the residual layers at night can stay for longer, and fires creating that effect can use that residual layer to expand the burning period they are using. And that only stops with closed canopy fires. So if we have to adapt our management to those extreme fires, we have to reduce full loads, but still keep a canopy fires. How close that canopy should be, I don't know. We are undergoing now a process of monitoring that to get into an idea. But my guess is that something above 70% is enough. So we've been monitoring that in Argentina, Chile, in Mediterranean Europe and Northern Europe. And we've seen that on top of 70% canopy cover, you get an inversion of 3 degrees already in most of summer days. So that's more than enough to just kill the plume and just kill the coupling going on. Yep. No, go ahead.
So, yeah, thank you for coming to talk to us about this. I'm struggling because in my mind, like for ponderosa pine, which is native here, historically it was very open savanna. Closed canopy of 70% is the reason why well, I guess I don't know now. The reason why we're having these big fires and having high severity and not bring it back. So if,
Yep.
if this was a common type of fire behavior, wouldn't we see the legacy of that on our landscape? When we reconstruct our forest back to, 150 years ago?
Yeah, that question has been the same for us with our Pinus nigra and our oak type savannas. So how that works? Well, those forests are based on really low fill types because they have a really high frequency. So as long as they have that high frequency, that high frequency means if you have fuel, I will burn it because every summer I am stealing that landscape with lightning strikes. I will burn it out. As long as you miss one of those return intervals, then you get into trouble. And those type of savanna forests, where at least the ones we have in Europe, and they are 500, 600, 700 years old. It means it's through the cold period of the Little Ice Age. That's a different way. But before that, I don't know. So both strategies seems to play together and create a mosaic in the landscape. But when it comes to me, it is, I truly believe before that the ponderosa pine-like strategy, it was the solution, which is the solution of the savanna types in Africa or the ESA types in the Iberian Peninsula. So that looks to me the universal solution. But when we started to see those forests, we started to realize that close cannot be gap or stands in the landscape where the only way to stop those extreme huge events. So if you mix both the strategies, then you get a better winning solution than only sticking with that strategy. But as said, this is new. It comes out from observation since 2017 around the world. It started to form after 2020. And now we are just getting ready the model to run that through the cloud in Copernicus system in any fire around the world. So we've tested that inside 200 fires. And in the next year, we're starting to test that in the last 200,000 fires we have in our database. So see what comes out of there. But we've seen that in Mongolia, we've seen that in Australia, in Chile, in Bolivia, in Greece, in Spain, in Sweden, and in California. So it looks to me pretty global thing.
So it seems like it's across all different types of forest types as well.
Because it's not depending on the fuel, it's depending on processes in the atmosphere. I kill everybody here. Everybody's kind of.
I have a question. What was the what was your cutoff, or how did you decide what an extreme fire was?
For us, it is the difficult and never-ending discussion. What's an extreme fire? Of course, for the Norwegian guys, extreme fire, you get a 10-hectare fire is an extreme fire. Yeah? If you go up to Portugal, if you don't get 50,000 hectares, it's not an extreme fire. So size is not a way to classify it. So for us in the fire service, extreme fire starts to be that type of fire you cannot predict. Based on the surface and the surface weather and the fuel load, you cannot predict that fire. That means, and that comes out to be, it goes above 3 times the rate of spread bias. So you use the Rotherham models and you run it, and it goes on top of 3 times more than the simulation, then that is, it is starting to be something that we can classify as extreme. And if that is sustained, then that's what we classify. I don't say that's the classification of extreme fire. For us as a firefighters, it comes down to this. If I can predict it, that means my fire will be certain. I know how to fight it, or who to evacuate, how to protect my civilians. At the moment the fire is doing something totally different than expected, I cannot protect my people, I cannot protect my firefighters. Then that comes into my extreme concept classification. So if I can say the fire tomorrow, so fire in Texas, it will go 20 kilometers an hour. And it goes 21 kilometers an hour. It's extreme, yeah, but it's predictable. So it's not into my extreme. It's extreme fire behavior, but it's not uncertain fire behavior. So for us, extreme carries on uncertainty. Yeah.
So the extreme fire behavior with fast rate
Kind
of
of
spread.
ping
Oh,
pong.
sorry.
No. I say it's kind of ping pong between you two.
Oh.
Because-
That happens a lot. Poor Sarah. So the rate of spread increases, but does the severity increase too? So it could move really fast, but it moves fast enough that you still have living trees. That's different from a firefighter standpoint, from an ecological standpoint.
Yeah. A lot of those fires, they move really fast. They are pretty intense, but they can still leave surviving trees because they are really compressed to the ground. And that's the deep flame process. And you can, if you go to campfire, a lot of fire survives, and a lot of tree survives inside that uranium phase area. And the same in Greece and the same in Australia. That doesn't mean that extreme is high severity, at least in those trees. Sometimes this is the coupler. Yeah.
We have a question online as well. Sean Haggerty, do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yes, thank you very much. Hopefully a simple question, but if I'm understanding some of what you've said right, sir, it sounds like maybe we've misinterpreted fire histories, or do you think we were missing important data as we've tried to reconstruct some of these fire regimes?
I think that both things. So we started to study those fire regimes coming out of more or less a cool weather of history in the last 2-3 centuries. So it was a process of fuel build up everywhere and drying up everywhere and warming up everywhere. But now that we are at certain levels, we start to see things that we were not used or we saw before, but because we didn't saw that so often, we just thought it was a rare event. And it happened to me when I was in Chile, 2017, in the Las Máquinas fire. That night, that fire burned 8,000 hectares per hour. That was a mind-blowing fire for my experience. I never saw in my life a fire burning 8,000 hectares per hour. So a fire 8,000 hectares a day is extreme fire, but per hour, that was unimaginable. For us, it was an extreme event. And we should say, well, we've been lucky to see that once in our lifetime, but that's it. But then June 2017 in Pedro Grande in Portugal, again, 5,000 hectares per hour. And in October in Portugal that year, 14,000 hectares per hour. And then we went to Bolivia and the same, and then we went to Australia. So it was not until the process hit our face again and again and again that we started to realize that that was a trend. Before, we thought it was a rare event and we didn't even account for it. So I think both of things. We didn't get exposed to that often enough before, and then we misinterpreted fire history. And the other thing is that now fire behavior analysts are global. I mean, if I have to base my analysis only on the data in Catalonia, I will never get to that idea. It's when I've been exposed to Portugal, Chile, US, Australia, then I get it exposed enough times in a short period of time to realize that something was happening. So I think that everything is playing its role here.
So if you model, so if you improve your models with this knowledge that you have added about relating to decoupling, then does all of the fires that you've currently labeled as extreme become non-extreme? Because you can predict it.
Yeah, well, the extreme process to pick up and to create the knowledge It's the same process. If you listen at the moment people invented the engines and the cars, they thought that 25 was the speed too dangerous for humankind to handle it. Yeah? And now our level of tolerance to speed is clearly different. Of course, that changed things, but still, that's what now we talk about abnormal fire behavior. I mean, when you can predict all fire behavior based on fuel and surface weather, then there is a normal fire. But when you need to incorporate energy coming from the evaporation condensation processes in the atmosphere, then that becomes extreme fire, because it's not accounting only for the energy on the surface, but it's accounting for the energy in the upper layers of the atmosphere. And that's the moment when it changes. But at the moment, I can envision that process of definition, but at the moment it still is based on the initial definition.
We're at 5 o'clock now.
Okay.
Feel like to wrap up, and everyone can give Mark another round of applause, please.